This is part 3 of the introduction to the Oera Linda book, translated from Frisian to Dutch by Dr. J. Ottema, and from Dutch to English by Dr. Sandbach. The map by Louis Figuier in the Année scientifique et industrielle, première année, Paris, Hachette, 1857, gives a distinct illustration of the formation of this land. Another statement, which occurs only in Strabo, finds also here a confirmation. Strabo alone of all the Greek writers relates that Nearchus, after he had landed his troops in the Persian Gulf, at the mouth of the Pasitigris, sailed out of the Persian Gulf by Alexander's command, and steered round Arabia through the Arabian Gulf. As the account stands, it is not clear what Nearchus had to do there, and what the object of the further voyage was. If, as Strabo seems to think, it was only for geographical discovery, he need not have taken the whole fleet. 1 or 2 ships would have sufficed. We do not read that he returned. Where, then, did he remain with that fleet? The answer to this question is to be found in the Frisian version of the story. Alexander had brought the ships on the Indus, or had had them built by the descendants of the Frisians who settled there, the Geert men, and had taken into his service sailors from among them, and at the head of them was Friso. Alexander, having accomplished his voyage and the transport of his troops, had no further use for the ships in the Persian Gulf, but wished to employ them in the Mediterranean. He had taken that idea into his head, and it must be carried into effect. He wished to do what no one had done before him. For this purpose, Nearchus was to sail up the Red Sea, and on his arrival at Suez was to find 200 elephants, 1,000 camels, workmen and materials, timber and ropes, etc., in order to haul the ships by land over the isthmus. This work was carried on and accomplished with so much zeal and energy that after 3 months' labor the fleet was launched in the Mediterranean. That the fleet really came to the Mediterranean appears in Plutarch's The Life of Alexander, but he makes Nearchus bring the fleet round Africa and sail through the Pillars of Hercules. After the defeat at Actium, Cleopatra, in imitation of this example, tried to take her fleet over the isthmus in order to escape to India, but was prevented by the inhabitants of Arabia Petraea, who burnt her ships. See Plutarch's Life of Anthony. When Alexander shortly afterwards died, Friso remained in the service of Antigonus and Demetrius, until, having been grievously insulted by the latter, he resolved to seek out with his sailors their fatherland, Friesland. To India he could not indeed return. Thus these accounts chime in with and clear up each other, in that way afford a mutual confirmation of the events. Such simple narratives and surprising results led me to conclude that what we had to do here was with more than mere saga and legends. Since the last 20 years' attention has been directed to the remains of the dwellings on piles, first observed in the Swiss lakes, and afterwards in other parts of Europe, see Dr. E. Rückert, Die Pfahlbauten, Würzburg, 1869. Dr. T. C. Winkler in the Volksalmanach, TNVA, 1867. When they were found, endeavors were made to discover, by the existing fragments of arms, tools, and household articles, by whom and when these dwellings had been inhabited. There are no accounts of them in historical writers beyond what Herodotus writes in Book V, Chapter 18 of the Paeonon. The only trace that has been found is in one of the panels of Trajan's pillar, in which the destruction of a pile village in Dacia is represented. Doubly important, therefore, Is it to learn from the writing of Apollonia that she, as Burgmagd, chief of the virgins, about 540 years before Christ, made a journey up the Rhine to Switzerland, and there became acquainted with the lake dwellers, or Marsaten. She describes their dwellings built upon piles, the people themselves, their manners and customs. She relates that they lived by fishing and hunting, and that they prepared the skins of the animals with the bark of the birch tree in order to sell the fare to the Rhine boatmen, who brought them into commerce. This account of the pile dwellings in the Swiss lakes can only have been written in the time when these dwellings still existed and were lived in. In the second part of the writing, Conered Oera Linda relates that Adel, the son of Friso, plus or minus 250 years before Christ, or about 250 years before Christ, visited the pile dwellings in Switzerland with his wife Ifkja. Later than this account, there is no mention by any writer whatever of the pile dwellings, and the subject has remained for 20 centuries utterly unknown until 1853, when an extraordinarily low state of the water led to the discovery of these dwellings. Therefore, no one could have invented this account in the intervening period, although a great portion of the first part of the work, the Book of Adela, belongs to the mythological period before the Trojan War. There is a striking difference between it and the Greek myths. The myths have no dates, much less any chronology, nor any internal coherence of successive events. The untrammeled fancy develops itself in every poem separately and independently. The mythological stories contradict each other on every point. Les mythes ne se tiennent pas is the only key to the Greek mythology. Here, on the contrary, we meet with a regular succession of dates, starting from a fixed period, the destruction of Atland, 2193 years before Christ. The accounts are natural and simple, often naive, never contradict each other, and are always consistent with each other in time and place, as, for instance, the arrival and sojourn of Ulysses with the Bergmat Calip at Valhallagara, or Velheren, which is the most mythical portion of all, is here said to be 1005 years after the disappearance of Atland, which coincides with 188 years before Christ, and thus agrees very nearly with the time at which the Greeks say the Trojan War took place. The story of Ulysses was not brought here for the first time by the Romans. Tacitus found it already in Lower Germany, see Germania, cap 3, and says that at Assiburgium there was an altar on which the name of Ulysses and his father Laertes were inscribed. Another remarkable difference consists in this, that the myths know no origin, do not name either writers or relatives of their stories, and therefore never can bring forward any authority, whereas in Adela's book, for every statement is given a notice where it was found or whence it was taken. For instance, this comes from Mino's writings. This is written on the walls of Varaburg. This is in the town of Freya. This at Stavia. This at Valhallagara. So on. There is also this further. Laws, regular legislative enactments, such as are found in great numbers in Adila's book, are utterly unknown in mythology, and indeed are irreconcilable with its existence. Even when the myth attributes to Minos the introduction of law-giving in Crete, it does not give the least account of what the legislation consisted in. Also, among the gods of mythology, there existed no system of laws. The only law was unchangeable destiny and the will of the supreme Zeus. With regard to mythology, this writing, which bears no mythical character, is not less remarkable than with regard to history. Notwithstanding the frequent and various relations with Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, we do not find any traces of acquaintance with the northern or Scandinavian mythology. Only Woden appears in the person of Wodan, a chief of the Frisians, who became the son-in-law of one Magi, king of the Finns, and after his death was deified. The Frisian religion is extremely simple and pure monotheism. Veralda, or Veralda's spirit, is the only eternal, unchangeable, perfect, and almighty being. Veralda has created everything. Out of him proceeds everything. First the beginning, then time, and afterwards Irtha, the earth. Irtha bore 3 daughters, Lida, Finda, and Freya, the mother of the 3 distinct races, black, yellow, and white, Africa, Asia, and Europe. As such, Freya is the mother of Freya's people, the Frieslanders. She is the representative of Viralda, and is reverenced accordingly. Freya has established her text, the first law, and has established the religion of the eternal light. The worship consists in the maintenance of a perpetually burning lamp, fodik, by priestesses, virgins. At the head of the virgins in each town was a burgtmagd, and the chief of the burgtmagden was the eremoder of the Freyesburg of Textland. The eremoder governs the whole country. The kings can do nothing, nor can anything happen without her advice and approval. The first eremoder was appointed by Freya herself, and was called Thesta. In fact, we find here the prototype of the Roman Vestal Virgins. We are reminded here of Veleda, or Velda, and Aurania in Tacitus, Germania 8, History IV 61, 65, V 22, 24, Annals L 54, and of Gauna, the successor of Veleda, in Dio Cassius, Fragments 49. Tacitus speaks of the town of Veleda as Edita Turis, page 146. It was the town Managarda Fords, or Munster. In the county of the Marsians, he speaks of the temple Tarfane, or Tarfank, so called from the sign of the Yule. Yule means a wheel, like 8 spokes. The last of these towns was Festaberg in Emeland. Temple Fosta, destroyed according to the Oca Scarlensis in 806. If we find among the Frisians a belief in a godhead and ideas of religion entirely different from the mythology of other nations, we are the more surprised to find in some points the closest connection with the Greek and Roman mythology, and even with the origin of 2 deities of the highest rank, Minerva and Neptune. Minerva, Athene, was originally a burgtmagd, priestess of Freya, at the town Valhallagara, Middelburg, or Domburg in Walcheren. And this Minerva is at the same time the mysterious enigmatical goddess of whose worship scarcely any traces remain beyond the votive stones at Domburg in Walcheren, Nehelenia, of whom no mythology knows anything more than the name, which etymology has been used for all sorts of fantastical derivations.